So this is a map of encampments. I think if you have been out and about at all over the last year, you have seen encampments across the city. This was actually a year ago, the encampments. The ones in green were encampments that kind of came and went, and the ones in red were active encampments. A year ago, on an average night, in the summer, so before the snow fell, we're a little early now this year, but there was about 30 people still sleeping outside. Next slide. So we all know that in March, COVID arrived in Ramsey County as the first case in Minnesota. The governor declared a peacetime emergency. And as part of the stay-at-home order and the peacetime emergency, there was also a statewide ban on sweeps of encampments. And so we were no longer able to clear encampments. Instead, we were leaving people in place because of the spread of COVID. It was safer for people to stay outside and not be moved around at that time. And that was the recommendation based on the CDC, and then the governor's emergency declaration followed suit. Instead, you can switch to the next slide, Michael, please. So instead, we resource people in encampments at a few locations with hand washing stations and access to bathrooms, because we wanted to make sure people were staying safe, even though they were outside. This is the encampment map as of today. As you can see, it's much bigger, and there are many more active encampments across the city. And currently outside, we're close to 400 people sleeping outside, even tonight as the snow falls. So it has grown drastically. It's grown drastically for lots of reasons. Some has been because of COVID, people who may have been doubling up or staying with family members, the families have asked them to leave for space and safety. Some of it has been, even though there's a moratorium on evictions, there isn't a moratorium on leases expiring. And so many people, especially at the low income levels, might have a month-to-month lease, or their lease has expired sometime within the year, and then they can't find new adequate housing. And so the numbers have grown. And then for all the reasons that people find themselves in their lifetime experiencing homelessness as well, but there's just not any additional spaces to go. Next slide. Oh, one more slide, please. It might be stuck.
Yeah, it is stuck.
Okay. Well, I'll just talk a little more and we'll catch up as we go.
I'll escape a bit and.
Okay, sounds good. So one of the things that we also had to do in response to COVID is that our shelter capacity had to shift, because many of our shelters were over capacity already, and we had to move them because of social distancing and space. And so here's kind of the numbers that part of our reaction to shelter. So the Dorothy Day or higher ground, we had pre-COVID 356 people staying there each night. But which by the way, was overcrowded by any sense of the imagination. People were sleeping on the lunchroom floor, they were doubled up, they were really close together. Because of COVID and the need for distancing and safety, that was cut virtually in half to 178. Union Gospel Mission was able to keep their capacity level because they expanded into rooms that weren't previously used for shelter, as well as the county-run Safe Space. Just 2 years ago, Safe Space was only a seasonal shelter, it would be opening in November as the cold weather hit, and then would close in April. Instead, about a year ago, we changed that to a year-round shelter because the demand was up. And now, and we've expanded into additional rooms in the building. And Safe Space is the current county-run shelter facility that is usually the overflow when higher ground and Union Gospel is full. As you can see, they're already full, and our safe space is full as well. Additionally, we added hotel shelters. And so we have a women's hotel shelter in the Como neighborhood in Bandana Square at the hotel there. And then we have an elders hotel shelter, which is the Best Western by the Capitol, formerly the Kelly Inn. And so we have elders staying there. And then we've moved people, by the way, several times over the summer to different hotels as we had contracts that had expired. And so we then reopened Mary Hall, which was on the Dorothy Day campus, and have now used that space additionally for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. No. So it's tricky with all the technology, but really what's important to understand is that we've had to spread people out and still accommodate the number of homelessness. It has required extensive amount of work. And you can imagine when we add additional locations, we've had to add additional staff as well to maintain safety and the services that are available. We have done extra training. As you know, many people who are experiencing homelessness, not all, but many experience mental health issues or chemical dependency issues. And so we've trained staff in the use of Narcan and first aid and CPR, as well as de-escalation if there happens to be conflicts. In situations, we've had to work with partners, extensive partners across the region. And so it really has been a tremendous amount of effort over the last 9 months. This slide demonstrates kind of the increase. You can see dramatically the increase of the number of people who are in encampments and the occupied encampments. The other thing, part of managing the number of encampments is that someone might set up an area where they're staying for a while and then leave and abandon, and all the refuge is left behind. And so city staff is in charge of cleaning that up. And so it all takes time, especially as spread out as they are, as you saw on an earlier map. So next slide. Hopefully it'll work. We're going to just talk about the breakdown of who is experiencing homelessness in Ramsey County. And so this is the breakdown by demographic. As you can see, there's a disproportionate number of people of color who experience homelessness. Obviously, there are, every race is represented, but there is a very large disproportionate people of color who are experiencing homelessness. And that's for lots of reasons that we can unpack, of course, but I think you can, systematic policies that are in place that lead to inequities along the race line and gender lines, as well as history of evictions, which happens a lot in the, especially for Black and Brown people that might have it on the record, making it even harder to find places to live. So this is just a quick snapshot of that. Next slide, please. And then we have a breakdown by age and gender. And so you can see that we have all ages of people, from young people to very old people that are in shelter and in hotel shelter or respite sites and both genders, of course, are represented. Women tend to skew younger as a population of homeless, and men kind of, as you see, come in all ages, but especially in that middle age, 45 to 54. Next slide, please. So all this work that we're doing, how are we paying for it? And so I think it's important for people to understand that we have been using a large majority of our CARES funding, which came from the federal government, to address. It all has to be COVID related for CARES funding, which is the expansion of our hotel program and the depopulation of shelters, as well as respite site. Which wasn't on our list earlier, is that currently the county has been using the former Boys Totem Town as a respite site. So if someone who's experiencing homelessness, or maybe even someone who can't return to their current living situation, either has symptoms of COVID or has a confirmed positive COVID case, then we put them up for recovery and isolation at the Boys Totem Town site. It's working okay. On average, we've had, up 5 to 12 people at any given time for respite there. The facility itself is not really well suited for anyone to live in or to stay long term. If you've never been out to Boys Totem Town, it's a very cold and chilling building. It's not very comfortable on the inside because it was a jail or used as a correctional facility. So the individual rooms that are being used for recovery are actually jail cells. So imagine a concrete block with a steel toilet without even a lid on it. So it's not someplace anyone wants to go and recover. And so, people who are there, they're there and want to get out of there as fast as possible. So we're also looking at how can we, make sure people are recovering, especially when they're sick, in a more dignified and humane way. So anyway, so here's the breakdown of how we've been paying for it. Obviously, these resources are only available, especially the CARES funding is only available until the end of the year. And that money will go away pretty quickly. So we are looking for longer term, more cost-effective solutions. In the hotels, they average between $60 and $78 a day per person. So as you can imagine, we're spending a lot of money pretty fast. On the good side, it's keeping some hotels in business during the shutdown, and so it, in some ways, it's still in our circular economy in the Twin Cities, but it's not sustainable for very long. Next slide. So you've probably seen in the news in the last 2 weeks a lot of changes related to the Bethesda Hospital, which is just outside the Como neighborhood. So it's at Como and in the Capitol Heights neighborhood. We have 2 weeks ago, I received a call from M Fairview Health notifying me that they were doing some changes to hospital services and that Bethesda would be closed as a hospital. It's currently the designated COVID hospital. Last I heard a few days ago, there were about 40 patients there that as either recovery are happening or they're moving them to St. Joe. And then Bethesda, the building itself, would become vacant. And so they were offering it to the county to rent for use of additional shelter and COVID recovery space. So I'll get in and kind of explain more if you want to hit the next slide, Michael. So again, this all happened about 2 weeks ago. And so we have been working very quickly to see where we can accommodate. I just want to back up before I go further. In this whole time since COVID began, we have been working really hard to identify and locate spaces to expand shelter because we knew the hotel space wouldn't be sustainable forever. And as our number of encampments have grown and the number of people outside, we needed more space. And so we have always been working really hard to identify spaces, as well as working against the clock and the weather. Of course, Mother Nature surprised us a bit early this year. And so we are working feverishly to get folks inside so that we don't have loss of life or severe injury because of the cold. We have looked far and wide across the county, and it has been kind of one closed door after another for whatever reason. I mean, there have been, early in COVID, I personally called every college campus in Ramsey County to see if we could use their empty dormitories. Unfortunately, not all students left, and many left early in the spring without taking out their personal belongings, and so that wasn't going to work. We have looked at several sites most of the sites that might be available are empty because people are always brainstorming. What about the empty Kmart? Or what about the empty Walmart or the Sears building? But again, they're large vacant buildings. So, and because of COVID, you can't just pack people inside. They also don't have any facilities. So there's no beds, there's no showers, there's no bathrooms. So it doesn't really move us ahead just by nature of being inside isn't enough. And so and most of them would cost significant amount of money to rehab, in which we can't necessarily use the CARES funding. So it was this tricky situation of how do you find a location that's suitable and dignified as well as meet the needs. So when Bethesda called, it was a very exciting proposition, but we also don't want to miss the fact that the closure of Bethesda and the reorg that M Fairview has done, it is also causing some other issues. And so there are people that are being laid off, and Ramsey County is ready to help those individuals. And we also are very concerned about what does that mean for healthcare in the Twin Cities, but we really are viewing them as kind of separate issues. So the decision to close Bethesda came, and we didn't have any say in that. We were really taking a look at what can we do potentially with an empty building in our community to continue to serve people. So next slide. So why was Bethesda so exciting? Again, I mentioned we've reviewed lots of other sites. We couldn't afford to either renovate or they weren't available when we needed them. But this actually, the hospital itself is turnkey ready. We can move in. We're planning, and I'll kind of get into exactly what we're planning, but the rooms are ready to go. It's set up and has beds and showers and facilities that we need. And the lease agreement is a good price. So next slide. So this is the outline of proposal currently. We are looking at 100 new low barrier beds for people experiencing homelessness. And a lot of times people don't understand what low barrier means, but we are talking about beds for people who might have mental health issues or might have addiction issues so that we can provide resources. They typically, because of the overcrowding in other situations or even in a hotel model, it's very difficult to manage people who might have higher needs in a situation like that because they're behind closed doors, they are left on their own. And if they don't have the supports, they're just not successful long-term. And so we are looking for a place that we can staff and do wraparound services for people at high in need. It also is the most vulnerable. So they're left outside right now and they're very vulnerable to get preyed on or their mental health and addiction becomes worse the longer they are outside. And so we really are trying to get the most vulnerable off the street as well. So that would be 100 beds. Our lease is for 2 winters. So that goes to the spring of 2022. It will be a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week shelter. Unlike Dorothy Day or Union Gospel or other shelters you've seen, the great thing about the county is that because we've been doing this work and working really well with partners, we can kind of pick all the best practices and create a new shelter that works better. And so people wouldn't have to leave in the morning. Oftentimes, if you've ever driven by Dorothy Day or Union Gospel or Salvation Army, there's people standing in line outside and they're waiting their turn to either get back in or they're just coming out because they have to clean the building and those kinds of things. And what we're proposing is that people coming in would have day programs. They would stay inside. No one's going to get pushed out into the street during the day, but that we want to keep the programs running. It would also be a shelter through referral. So we have a lot of partners that we work with that do outreach teams and healthcare and are really working with the folks who are currently outside. And so it would be a referral system. They might go to our safe space, the other shelter I mentioned, that tends to be an overflow, and get a referral that say this is the right person that needs to be at Bethesda. And so it helps us just make sure we're making contact to contact and bringing people inside as quickly as possible. Once folks are referred and are inside, they could stay for several nights and days, similar to our existing hotel program. They would have their own rooms with access to meals and the care appropriate for their needs, so that we can stabilize them and then get them into longer term housing solutions. Day services would include on-site chemical and mental health help and housing navigation services, financial support services, employment opportunities, and also working with our veteran population. Next slide. This Lowberry model, which will accept and provide support for those who are currently under the influence. So oftentimes at night, at a shelter, if anyone's ever been, as people are kind of checking in, they might come in already intoxicated because they've been out during the day and maybe having drinks or using drugs, and then they come to the shelter. And because of the current capacity of existing shelter system, they just don't have the staff or the ability to take someone in that state. And so they often get turned away and left on the street or sent to detox. And so in this case, we were saying is, if someone shows up like that, we will take them in and get them the help they need, and then provide the wraparound services to help them to sobriety, or if they're in a mental health crisis, to also be able to provide for that. It's a smaller number of physically separated beds will also be used for respite care for the unsheltered with COVID symptoms and monitoring and meals. And because the hospital is big enough with working elevators, which is really exciting for us, because many places don't have that, we can actually isolate and quarantine within the same building and provide services there. This strategy has worked effectively to minimize the spread of COVID to date. We have far fewer folks in respite, as I mentioned. It's been about 6 to 12 at any given time. And luckily, even in this very vulnerable population, we have only lost 2 people experiencing homelessness to COVID. 2 lives are too many, but given the numbers and the fatality rate of especially vulnerable people with compromised immune systems, in which people who have been living outside for a long time are, we feel like we've been doing a really good job, and we want to continue to do that and to serve this population. Next slide. So again, we will provide a range of services on site, from culturally specific care to housekeeping and maintenances contracted by the community. We're setting up a 24-hour-a-day site security in partnership with M Fairview about the grounds and entrances, and really working to de-escalation and trauma-informed responses at this particular site. Our lease and program at Bethesda will take us through, as I said, 2 winters. It's not a long-term solution, but it's a very important component as we plan urgently for what a long-term solution looks like, and that's affordable housing. And we're doing this work together, not separately or in isolation, but really thinking about how do we stabilize this really vulnerable community. I think of it like triaging. We have to triage the situation while we figure out long-term care solutions. I come from the military background, and so the first step is to stop the bleeding so that we can take care of the bigger problem, which is really what we're trying to do. Next slide. So just today, we did approve the lease agreement at Bethesda at the county board meeting, and then this afternoon we actually had a workshop on homelessness and kind of what's the rest. So we've got this one solution for 100 beds at Bethesda, but what does the rest of the picture look like? And so we actually had a county-wide workshop on that today. And our board chair directed our county manager, with support of the other commissioners, to explore options for shelter programs for those who are currently housed in hotels. Because as I said, the hotels are working, but it's not sustainable and it's very expensive. And so we have directed staff to figure out like what comes next. We do know that staff has identified potential partners that have dormitory settings, that they may be able to move individuals who are currently in hotels to those dormitory type settings. One of the things that I think is really important is that there's no one solution that works for everyone, which is why we're really working to try to find what's the right variety and combination. The other thing that we have found, and not everything we've done has been successful. We have tried a lot of things. We discovered very quickly when the civil unrest from the murder of George Floyd came to St. Paul, we quickly cleared encampments and put people directly in hotel rooms. And if I'm completely honest, it didn't work very well. And so moving people from outside where they have community and kind of their own lifestyle directly inside into their individual hotel rooms has sets people up for failure because they maybe don't understand that they have to follow certain rules. They're used to communal living. It might trigger mental health, or their addiction is not manageable because we can't see what they're doing behind closed doors. And so the few incidences we had in hotels that didn't go well were really from that movement of directly from outside and into a hotel room. Just because folks who have been outside for a long time might not be ready. And so that's why this idea of kind of graduated steps and phases, and people can move through them pretty quickly, but we want to make sure that everybody is ready so that we can be successful. The goal really is to better serve the program needs as well as reducing the cost per bed. And it also allows us to retain the existing hotel rooms to maybe move the next folks in as we try to move people inside, especially as winter is approaching, but really for long-term sustainability. We don't have any specific sites identified yet, but staff has been working with partners and had some initial conversations about potential locations. The other thing I think is really important is that we don't want to concentrate necessarily everyone in the same place. We know successfully that people do better in community and they do better in neighborhoods, especially when neighborhoods are welcoming and want to reach out to their neighbors. And we have some great examples. I actually at the board meeting bragged about how welcoming the Como neighbors have been. As you know, you have a women's hotel program, and many of the neighbors have been really lovely. And I've heard from women in the hotels that they feel welcome, they feel like they're part of a community. And so they also want to behave in a way that fits into a community. And I think that's really important. In Hamlin Midway, there's an encampment there that the neighbors have adopted, and they don't think about them as homeless. They're talking about their neighbors who are outside and they're helping to resource. And it really does set people up for success. There's a lot of data, and there's actually a great TED talk about how in Portugal, at one point they were criminalizing, like we do in the United States, drug use. And they discovered that their drug use was going on the rise and their success rate was going down. And so they decriminalized it and said, the way we need to deal with people who are addicted is to bring them back into community and surround them with what they need, to include love and relationships. And that is the same for people who are experiencing homelessness. And so this is a really important part of this. And so as we're looking at new sites and as we're looking at locations, we are looking in neighborhoods. And so I want to be really honest about that and to be clear, because I know that people get really nervous and what does this mean? And we heard about earlier when we started the meeting about catalytic converter theft and who is doing that, right? And so I think about both in that like balance of things, and especially as the winter gets colder and people are outside, and if you have ever been hungry or you're fighting for survival, you're willing to do anything. And that includes steal and break the law, even though that might not be who you are as a person. But survival makes people do other things, and addiction makes people do other things. So if we can resource people and we can get them what they need, then they don't have to turn to those things. And so it's really about how do we bring that compassion to address the issue. But we're not doing that blindly either. And we're aware that it will require staffing, and it will require us to pay attention and for us to, be in connection with community. And so that's what's really important. And that's why I was so excited to come here to present to you all tonight. So you know what it is we're doing, why we're doing it, and where we have to go, so that if we find a location perhaps in Como, that we have kind of already built this conversation. And we can answer questions and get there together. Because our goal really is really to help us to be successful in this rate. So with that, I will open to questions. I saw things happening in the chat, but I wasn't watching because I was presenting. So someone's asking for statistics. I don't have them off the top of my head, but we can get statistics on success rates for sure. Any other, I don't know if there are questions.
I have one question. Does any of the beds allow for, or rooms allow for like families or children or any of that?
Yeah. Oh yes, yes. Thank you very much. So we actually have a family hotel program that's been in existence for a couple years, and right now Hotel 340, which is downtown, kind of by the river, a beautiful hotel, is housing all of our families. We've expanded our family hotel program, and that's, again, like I said, we've had that for a few years, and then we added to it. Interfaith Action is currently our provider for family shelter and hotel program. And so that's been going really well, and we will continue that program. Yeah. We also have face-to-face. There's 5 other local nonprofits that have been doing the youth shelter. Face-to-face has some hotel rooms there, also at the is it Best Western or Doubletree? I'm sorry, I get them confused. But the one in Bandana Square, the hotel there, they also have some youth that they have put up in a hotel program there as well. And youth is 18 to 24.
So I'm sure you guys are super busy, so thank you for coming and talking to us and everything. One of my questions is, I think the lack of communication is probably an issue. I mean, we didn't hear from you or about the women's shelter for a long time, and it took a lot to get any sort of information from you guys. So I do think to be successful, we need to get neighbors information, and it's unfair to expect people to just jump on board right away if we don't have information and know what's going on and what's happening, you know? So yeah. I guess moving forward, how are you planning to communicate to neighbors and neighborhoods about what's happening? And then also, as you know, a district council, if like we don't know what's going on, how can we also how can we help inform our neighbors? And then also, how can we as councils connect better to just help, you know, beyond our district as well with communication?
Yeah, thank you for that. This is a tricky thing because I feel like this is all I talk about all day, every day. And so, you know, you sometimes lose sight that other people aren't necessarily listening. And so, you know, we have done a series of, you know, town hall events and connecting with district councils, as well as, you know, newspaper articles and that kind of stuff, and our newsletters. And so, we have put it out there, but I would actually like to hear from you how you would like to be communicated with or hear about it, because it's challenging. I think that people don't necessarily pay attention until it's directly impacting them. And so it's hard to know exactly what's the right approach. And so I would actually love to hear from you about your ideas, and Ethan, who's my assistant, is on, and you know, we're both listening to think about ideas of how we can connect more directly as we move forward. And some of those, you know, the hotel programs, I'll admit, is that they moved really quickly, and we had to move people around a few different times. We first started the hotel program in April, and everyone was at the Intercontinental. And then through a series of trial and errors, because we put so many people in one hotel, the Intercontinental, as the economy opened up back up, said, we don't want, you know, we'd like you all to move. And they gave us 2 weeks to move 280 people. And so we quickly had to find other providers. It went out as an RFP, and hotels actually applied to us to be a host of sites. And so that's how they were selected in partnership. And so some of it is that way, but to have a larger conversation about where folks are and what they're doing, for sure. There's also this interesting balance about respecting people's privacy too. And not everyone who's homeless wants people to know that they're homeless. And so if they've come to us for services and we're putting them in a hotel, they don't necessarily appreciate telling all the neighbors like, oh, hey, all these ladies that are staying here are homeless, because they're trying to get their lives back to normalcy. And there's a lot of shame around being homeless. And so it's also this interesting balance for us on what's the right approach, both in informing neighbors, but also not exposing people who have this kind of sense of shame too. So anyway, all that to be said is I'd love to hear from you of how you would like me to better communicate with you.
So Trista, there's a question in the chat about, are there formal partnerships for working with the women who are in the shelter right now in Como or elsewhere?
Yeah, so like formal neighborhood partnerships, I guess. I mean, we have service providers that are, formalized, that are working with the women. They're doing healthcare and mental health services, and they come in and do that work in the shelter. But I don't know that there's like a formal neighborhood volunteer network.
Trista, that was my question. This is Jennifer.
Okay.
And I was just asking because you mentioned that some of the women were feeling welcomed by the neighbors. So I was just wondering, who are those welcoming neighbors? How are they connected?
Yeah, so I have heard this, and I think it's more of, someone standing at the bus stop, or they're outside and someone walking by will just engage them and say hello. So I don't think it's so much a formal experience, but more of a, I don't feel out of place here, I feel like I belong here kind of experience that I've been hearing from. Yeah. The kind of normal friendly stuff you would do, even if you don't recognize someone, or maybe they, aren't dressed as well, or, as collected as you might be.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Mike, hi.
Hi.
Hi, Trista. Thank you. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate you going through the history. You guys have been scrambling. Thank you for sharing the statistics on the racial makeup of people that have been homeless in the county. I think that is a huge issue for our community and to deal with, and that's helpful for the community engagement committee of this district council that I'm doing some work with as an issue and really to maybe address on our Sunday lecture series. And it, there's just not enough money. And I see a lot of this CARES money is going for this, and this is great. Can you talk about what we need to do in this county to get permanent housing, permanent affordable housing happening? I mean, I know there's lots of things, but I also know you've been working at the HRA level.
Yeah.
Because realistically, for those of us that follow this, very few people that are in the shelter system in Ramsey County have been able to be placed in permanent housing, not because of the issues of each homeless person, but because there just aren't the units.
Yeah, thank you for that. And you're right, Janet. It's like this kind of system that we keep trying to stabilize people, but we don't have any place for them to go once they're stabilized. I mean, even in the last 9 months, of all the folks that have been in the hotel program, so 285, we've been able to get only 29 of them into permanent housing. And that's with case management and work. And it isn't for the lack of them being stable. Now there's just no place where they might need to go, or maybe they have things on their rental history that also precludes them. And so it's really tricky. So I will tell you, I've been working on this issue of how do we get the upstream done. For the first time ever, Ramsey County through our HRA has allocated money $9 million to build affordable housing and create additional affordable housing. We've also invested in the rehab and procurement of naturally affordable housing. So mostly apartment buildings that are in the area that maybe go up for sale so that prospectors don't come and buy them and then raise the prices. So we have put into the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund to say we want to preserve that naturally occurring affordable housing. Additionally, I've been leading the policy action group since COVID started, and we keep pushing. We need more housing, and everyone is on the same page now. It took a little time. And to be honest, every possible solution needs to be on the table. We can't say no anymore. We can't say that doesn't work for us. And I think this is especially important in land use, in the land use committee. And I serve on the land use board of the Met Council and have been in great partnership with the city, is that we need to think about what kind of building codes and land use that we put into place that are causing unintentional burdens, right? And I like to say it's like modern day redlining, right? So redlining was a time when we put, especially people of color, could only live in certain neighborhoods. But sometimes out of the idea of like, we want a certain aesthetic, or we want everyone to have 2-car garages. Well, is that really necessary if we want to house people, and what additional cost does that come with so that we're keeping people out? So it really is it's a holistic approach to say we need to have all kinds of housing for all kinds of people. We need to think about how we're using our land differently, and we need to invest. So I saw someone in the chat say, are you thinking about land trust? Absolutely. I serve on the Twin Cities Land Trust Board. We're thinking about not only land trust, but I actually, and land banks, but I also think that it's the first time that we need to think about a public land trust. And so, oftentimes we're selling land or we're putting it into a trust that someone else manages. But I actually have been pushing the idea of, what about if we have county land that we can maintain it, because then we can maintain the how expensive rents are or the types of housing that go there. Plus we're maintaining the land cost. And so then it makes it cheaper for someone who wants to build or buy or own, because wealth equity is the other part that is a huge difference. We have this huge equity gap that's also racially defined. And a lot of it has to do with the lack of housing stock. So I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent, but it's so relative. And so to think about, I heard a quote recently through this work that said, if we actually had the housing stock to meet the need, we could end the wealth gap in 1 generation. So just think about that for a minute, is like, what are we doing? Because we put so much equity into our homes. And so think about how we do that. So I just am really, I'm really passionate about this work. I really think that we have to continue to grow that stock, and we have to invest. I mean, here's the reality is, if we don't prioritize and invest in housing solutions, everything else in our system spirals. It doesn't matter if we're talking about food assistance or other services that the county provides. It's this constant spiral, and many of our staff are on burnout because they see the same clients over and over, and it always comes back, but we couldn't ever get them housing, so they get back into this cycle. And so until we can get our community stabilized, we have inequality in our health, we have inequality in our wealth, we have inequality in our systems altogether. And so we have, and our education system. So we need to change that. So someone put in the chat, please give your personal opinion on the fundamental causes of homelessness. I think it's a list. It isn't one thing, right? And so it is a combination of policy, bad policy that adds to racism and racial systems. It's the lack of good paying, living wage jobs, and it's the lack of available housing for families. And so it's a combination of things. It's not any one thing. And then add that into mental health issues and addiction issues, which are on the rise for all of us, even those of us who have housing, mental health and addiction issues. And it's just a matter, I mean, it's a fragile thread that keeps us from being stabilized to becoming homeless. And I think that's really important, that we build systems, because as Paul Wellstone said, we all do better when we all do better. And so, yeah, anyway, thank you.
We've got time for maybe one more question.
Great, thanks.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. Very helpful. I'm not on any board or anything. I just live in the neighborhood in the McLaren
Right.
Hill area there near
Okay.
the Best Western at the
Oh, yeah.
Bandana Square. And
Mhm.
I just wonder, and I think you kind of answered my question, but we're just wondering, because we have seen, and not so much we haven't been taking walks now that it's gotten cold, but when it was warmer, and it seemed like the amount of, just garbage and stuff like that laying around, and we heard stories. So I'm just wondering, you mentioned that at the Bethesda, they're going to have this, they've got this kind of full program of people that kind of support the residents.
Mhm.
So they don't have anything like that at Best Western, people that can kind of help these people, or
Yeah.
kind of when they have issues, or give them
Yeah.
some community. Are they just kind of on their own, like you're saying, stuck in these rooms with the door?
Yeah, it isn't, I shouldn't say they have no services. They don't have as many services. So there are staff at Bethesda 24 hours a day with the residents that are there. And then during the day, mental health and healthcare and chemical dependency come in, and they do visits to each person in the room. But there,
Trista,
it's
do you
probably,
mean Bandana Square? You said Bethesda.
yes,
You-
yes.
Okay, just to
Bandana
clarify,
Square.
thank
Oh,
you.
you meant the
Sorry.
Bandana Square? Okay.
Yeah, at the Bandana Square Hotel. Which one is it there? Is it
Best
Best
Western.
Western? Yeah, so that's where we've got ladies at the Best Western. And so they get services during the day, but at night, there's maybe 1 or 2 staff people in the hotel along with hotel staff. There are other guests in the hotel as well. But so it has been, I don't think any of us intended to run hotel programs for homeless necessarily, but because of the COVID and situation, we've had to, but and so we've learned that we actually need a little bit more, and which is what we're proposing at Bethesda. Our goal also is to not necessarily leave those ladies at the Best Western, but move them into a dormitory setting in the future to help them stabilize. And then we're in great relationship with the owner of the Best Western around, how do we do maintenance? How do we make sure it's cleaned up? We want to make sure that the neighborhood still feels like great. We will welcome stuff. And it's also, there is something about human behavior, right? When when they come in, they're going to be messy at first because they haven't followed the same rules. But when they see the neighborhood is engaged, the neighborhood is welcoming, and we're cleaning up, they start behaving differently. And so some of it is like reacclimating them into the norms of society because they're welcome back. And so I hope it's improved a little bit. I know that early when we first did it, there was kind of a big mess, and I got a lot of phone calls about trash and empty bottles and some other behavior. And so we're working really quickly to respond. And we've got staff and management on site that when they hear those complaints, and by the way, if you see something that doesn't feel right or it becomes a problem, please let my office know, because we can respond quickly, as opposed to you kind of being annoyed for a long time and then you're just mad, right? Because we want to be able to respond quickly so that we can make it better for everyone. And that goes for everyone on the call. And thank you for raising that question so we could talk about it.
Thank you for answer. Appreciate it.
Well, Trista, before I turn it over to our chair, Melissa, I appreciate you giving your enthusiasm and your energy. The reality of the situation is overwhelming to me. So I'm just grateful that you provided the hope there too, in detailing out the broad outline proposal, and really appreciative of your respect and dignity that you give to people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
With your presentation, would you be okay if we shared that with our community in our newsletter?
Absolutely, any part of it. And certainly also Michael has my contact, or you all should have my contact as well, to put that in your newsletter if there are questions and concerns. Can I just answer one more question? I just saw pop in the chat. Someone wanted to know how we decide where people go. So we currently have it set up that we have seniors in one hotel, single women and couples in another hotel, and then our single men, so to speak, are at Mary Hall. So we've broken it by gender and based on size. So it wasn't like this hotel's nicer, you get to go there or not. It's just based on how we can manage staff and programs. So yeah. And no, Janet, we're not buying any hotels. We don't want to be an owner for lots of reasons. But a lot of it has to do also with if you're a tenant, the landlord can ban guns on the premises, but if we're a government agency and we own it, we can't do that. So just for safety reasons, we don't ever want to own.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So
good fact.
Unless there's a judge on site. So we need to put a courtroom at any site in order to ban guns. So for lots of reasons, we don't want to be an owner. We will be a tenant. Yeah. Good. Thank you all. I know you have other work to do, but I'm here anytime. Feel free to reach out to me. I love to talk about this because it's really important.
Well, Trista, thank you so much for joining us. And you can see in the chat box, everyone was learned quite a bit. And I know every time you've come to a meeting, you always have business cards. You're very approachable. So I encourage anyone, if they have questions or comments, to please reach out to Trista. And then to answer your question about how we can be better communicators with one another, I think, keeping in touch with Michael would be the best way. And he's wonderful at forwarding information to the rest of the council. So thank you again.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
You too. Well, moving on, we're going to start the board business section of our meeting. And the first